Hi everyone. Today I'm talking about how to write your book using your intuition. This is a topic I teach on a lot because I work with INFJ and INFP personality types. People who have a naturally intuitive temperament, which are those INFJ and INFP personality types, are also usually called to be writers. What these types don't know is that your creative ability is intertwined with your intuitive ability. The two go hand in hand, they work together. This is not really understood or talked about in the general population. It's getting a little bit more popular. I am seeing more articles, more books popping up on intuitive writing, tips and advice for intuitive writers, but it's still not fully understood. It's definitely not understood how strong the connection is between intuitive ability and creative ability. So what happens usually when an intuitive person realizes they want to write a book, or they start writing a book and then they want a little bit of guidance, they usually take the normal route first. So that means they settle on the idea, or they really try to decide the idea, the plot, the story, what they're going to write about. And then they look online, they find all the traditional writing advice, and they usually start by writing an outline. That's pretty much the accepted way to do things. Before you start writing, you should have an outline. You should pretty much have a rough idea of what's going to happen in your story or your memoir, how it's all going to play out from beginning to end. After you have that outline, a lot of times writers will take it another step further and start brainstorming plot points or writing chapter summaries. Intuitive writers who are non-intuitive, anyone who follows this method, they tend to do this with fiction or nonfiction, right? So they're trying to break the book down into lots of little steps that are already mapped out, that are already pre-decided upon, and then they're just going to write according to those steps that they've already mapped out. So this tends to work well for non-intuitive writers, for writers who have a natural rational temperament. Breaking things down into goal-oriented concrete steps can really work. This is not a bad method by any means, but for intuitive writers, usually what happens after they do the outline, after they brainstorm the plot points or they write the chapter summaries, they start writing and then they hit a wall. They either don't know what comes next, or it seems like what they've outlined isn't going to work, or all the plot points they brainstorm sort of collapse and fall apart. And then they end up feeling very blocked and very stuck. And every time they sit down to work on the project, whether they're trying to revise the outline or they're actually trying to write some new material, they're trying to write out scenes, they feel a great deal of dread and resistance. They don't want to do it. And it tends to feel very hard. It's not fun anymore. What started out as an idea that felt really juicy and magical, and they loved dreaming about it and they loved fantasizing about how this story was going to play out, how they were going to write it, it now feels like it's slowed down or come to a complete halt. It's like this halting kind of progress. Nothing's really happening. The whole thing tends to feel horrible. So why? Why does this happen to intuitive people when they start trying to write in this way? The bottom line is basically for intuitive people, rational writing methods don't work. Sometimes little bits and pieces of them can work, but as a whole, a rational writing method where you map out what you're going to do before you start writing, you rely heavily on an outline, you're brainstorming those plot points or those chapter summaries, that's not going to work for intuitive people. It puts us in a position where we are swimming upstream against ourselves. We are going against our own gifts, which are intuitive. And intuition doesn't take well to being planned out. So if you are an intuitive person, if you're an intuitive writer, you need an intuitive creative process. That's going to be the best way for you to actually write and actually finish anything, or you're not going to be able to sustain the energy needed to carry you through an entire writing project. And if you've ever written a book before, or if you've tried to write a book, you know it can be a really long process. I know there's a lot of stuff out there that says, write your book in 90 days, write your book in 6 months. I talk to a lot of writers who generally assume it should take 1 year to write a book. There is no general assumption really about how long it's going to take you to write your book. Every book is unique, and I've known some writers who take 5 years to write a book. For an intuitive writer, usually 2 years is the average for a rough draft. Intuitive writers tend to write a bit more slowly. So you're going to need long-term energy to sustain you through that 12 months, 24 months, 36 months, who knows? But you're going to need energy to sustain you so you can see it through. So the best advice is to scrap the rational method. Do not use rational methods. If you're using a rational method and it's working perfectly fine, cool, you can stick with that. But if you're using them and they're not working at all, get rid of them. Just drop them. You need to shift into a more intuitive, creative process. So instead of sitting down and doing the outline before you start writing the book or at the very start, what works for a lot of intuitive writers who really want to use an outline is to write the outline along the way. So you're writing the outline side by side as you're writing the book. Now, I always suggest too, try going with no outline. A lot of intuitive writers do well with no outline. I personally never work with outlines. Novels, nonfiction, no matter what I'm writing, I never ever do an outline. And I never have, and I've worked this way for years, and it really works for me. My experience with intuitive writers is that there's a spectrum. So some people really like to go no outline at all. Other people do want the outline because it feels sort of like a security blanket. So if you think you would like to use an outline, be really flexible with it. Don't do it at the beginning, but do it in the process of writing the book and revise the outline according to what you're writing for the book. The next thing to do is to stop trying to make sense of everything before you start. This is another big stumbling block I see for intuitive writers. This feeling of, I need to know how the book is going to end. I need to know the beginning, the middle, the end, and how that's all structured and ordered. I need to know the structure. I hear that a lot. People are in the first draft, like really in the dark forest of the first draft, and they're like, I need to know, the structure and the organization. It's too soon to do all of that in the first draft. So lay off trying to make everything make sense in the first draft. Follow the energy more. Instead of trying to figure out where everything fits together, follow what's coming through and just try to get that down on the page. People always say, well, how do I do that? Write according to the images you see in your head. Write according to the characters' voices that are telling you things. Don't try to figure out how this is all going to fit together or why they're telling you these things or why you're seeing these images. If you're seeing the images, write them down. If a character is telling you something, write it down. Worry about how it all fits together later. One of the last things I'll say is you don't have to write in order. And this is another big preconceived notion for intuitive writers that really gets in the way because we live in this culture where everything's very linear and we've been taught in school that we should do things in order, right? We should do things A, B, C, D. For intuitive writers, because we think in a web, that concept of a linear order doesn't really make sense to us and it really hinders us. So let yourself write out of order. Let yourself write according to what's coming into your mind, right? The images you're seeing, what the character's telling you, you can rearrange the pieces later. Last thing I'll say is be prepared to manage your anxiety along the way. The number one problem I see for intuitive writers who are struggling in writing a book and they're struggling to really let themselves embrace an intuitive writing process is that they are not managing their anxiety along the way. Every time they get anxious, every time they get scared that they're doing it wrong or the story is taking a rest and they're not seeing so much as they were before, it's not coming through as strongly before, instead of backing off and resting, they're pushing harder and they're trying to force things, and that comes directly from anxiety. When you let your anxiety run the show as you were writing a story, you will get freaked out and then you will try to plot and plan when you don't need to plot and plan. So if you have the urge to start putting in structure, organization, nailing down every little detail, you're really worried about the characters, you're sort of like overthinking the process, right? Like when you kind of pick up on that energy of like, oh, I'm really overthinking this. There doesn't seem to be a solution right now, but I won't stop thinking about it. I won't give it a rest. Know that anxiety has shown up. And when anxiety has shown up, you definitely do need to take a break from the book. You definitely do need to take a rest, because when you are working from a place of anxiety with a creative process, the results are never going to be good. You're just going to be forcing something into a box that it doesn't fit in. So this is basically what an intuitive writing practice looks like. You also will be adding your own things along the way, of course. I have to say that there is no one size fits all when it comes to working with an intuitive creative process, an intuitive writing process. These are just basic guidelines that you can experiment with, but you're going to have to see what works for you. If this video was helpful for you, please like, share, subscribe to the channel. I do all sorts of videos on topics like these, and that stuff really helps. I really appreciate it. Please also subscribe to my newsletter. I send out tons of information, upcoming classes, courses, recommendations, all sorts of things. You will find it in the comments below to sign up for that link there. And please also send me questions or ideas for other videos that you would like to see me make. I love hearing from listeners and viewers, and I love getting your guys' take on what's important to you and what you're struggling with. So if you have a problem about creativity or writing or intuition, life as an INFJ, INFP, please feel free to email me, lauren@laurensapala.com, and let me know you'd like to see a video on a certain topic, and I'll make a video on that. Thanks so much for everyone for tuning in today. I'll see you next time.